The attorney's hands were shaking when he spread the documents across his desk, and I remember thinking that lawyers are not supposed to shake. Mr. Calloway was 63 years old, had practiced estate law in Nashville for 4 decades, and had probably seen everything a family could do to itself over a piece of property. But when he looked up at me that Thursday morning, his face had gone the color of old chalk, and the woman beside him, his paralegal, had pressed her lips together so tightly they had disappeared entirely. "Miss Henderson," he said, and his voice was the kind of careful that people use when they are about to detonate something. "I need you to understand that what I am about to tell you changes everything. The deed you brought me is authentic. It has been in your grandfather's name for 31 years, and based on the current assessed value of the land and the attached mineral rights, we are looking at a property worth somewhere between $1.4 and $1.9 million. I could not breathe. I just looked at the small iron key on the desk between us, the one I had found curled inside the velvet lining of an old music box that my sister had thrown into a donation bin at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning while our grandfather's house was still warm. "But there is a problem," Mr. Calloway continued. "Someone has already filed paperwork attempting to transfer this property out of your grandfather's estate. The signature on the transfer form does not match the one we have on file." He turned the folder toward me and pointed to the bottom of the page, and I did not need him to say the name because I already knew it. It was my sister's handwriting. I would have recognized it anywhere. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Claire Henderson. I am 29 years old, and until that morning in Mr. Calloway's office, the most valuable thing I owned was a 2017 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard that I kept meaning to replace. I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary in East Nashville. I grade papers at the kitchen table of my 1-bedroom apartment on Friday nights and spend my Saturdays at the farmer's market and my Sunday afternoons visiting whoever in my family still wanted to see me, which for the last several years had mostly just been my grandfather. My sister Diane is 35. She has a mortgage on a house in Brentwood, a husband who travels for work, and a way of entering a room that makes everyone in it feel slightly smaller. She was the kind of person who was always described first in sentences about our family. "Diane is so successful. Diane looks so beautiful. Diane really has it together." I was the afterthought at the end of those sentences, the one that started with, "And Claire is sweet too," in a tone that made sweet sound like a consolation prize. I had made peace with this a long time ago. I was not the golden daughter. I knew that. I had built a life that did not require anyone's approval to function, and I had found, in doing so, that the people who actually loved me were easier to count and easier to hold. My grandfather Walter was at the top of that list. He was 81 years old when he died, a retired machinist who had lived alone in the same house in Donelson for 40 years, ever since my grandmother passed. He had a front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a small vegetable garden that he tended himself until his knees gave out, and a record player that he ran every evening after dinner while he read. He called me every Sunday without fail. Not to check in or to update me on Diane's achievements. Just to talk. Just to ask what I was reading and whether my students were giving me trouble and whether I had tried the new Thai place that had opened near my apartment. He was the only person in my family who called me just to hear my voice. I visited him every few weeks, more often in the last year when his health started its quiet decline. He never complained. He never asked for anything. He just made coffee and sat across from me in his kitchen and talked like we had all the time in the world, which of course we did not. About 8 months before he died, he said something to me that I did not understand at the time. We were sitting on the porch watching the light go gold across his neighbor's yard, and he reached over and put his hand on mine without looking up from the middle distance. "You have always been the one who paid attention, Claire," he said. "Not because you had to, because you cared about what was real." I told him that was a kind thing to say. He shook his head like I had missed the point entirely. "When I am gone," he said, "they are going to tell you I left nothing worth keeping. Do not believe everything you hear. And if you find something that does not make sense, do not let anyone rush you past it." I asked him what he meant. He just looked at me with those steady gray eyes and said, "You will know it when you see it. Just do not let them take it before you have a chance to look." I promised him I would pay attention. I had no idea what I was promising. He passed on a Wednesday in March. My mother called me at work between second and third period, and her voice was flat in the way it always got when she was managing something she did not want to feel. "Your grandfather is gone," she said. "We are doing the estate this weekend. Bring boxes." The estate. Like it was a business transaction. Like 40 years in one house could be reduced to a logistics problem if you used the right language. I drove to Donaldson on Saturday morning. Diane's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. She had been there since Friday, my mother told me, getting a head start. Getting a head start was Diane's way of controlling the narrative before anyone else could participate in it. By the time I walked through the front door with my empty boxes, 2/3 of my grandfather's belongings had already been sorted into keep, donate, and trash. Diane was in the living room in a linen shirt and work gloves, directing my mother on which shelves to clear first. She looked up when I came in and gave me the smile she reserved for people she considered minor inconveniences. "Finally," she said. "I was about to do the back bedroom without you." I looked around the room. The bookshelves were mostly empty. The side tables were bare. His record collection, 63 albums he had built over 50 years, was stacked in a cardboard box near the door marked "Donate." "Some of those records are first pressings," I said. Diane looked at the box without interest. "Who is going to want them?" It was not a question. I picked up the box and moved it to the keep pile without asking for permission, and Diane's mouth tightened, but she did not say anything. That was our dynamic. She set the terms. I adjusted them quietly. We both pretended this was harmony. We worked through the morning. My mother moved between rooms with an efficiency that looked like grief if you did not know her well, and if you did know her well, it looked like avoidance, which was her preferred method of handling things that hurt. Diane sorted and directed, and occasionally held something up with an expression that made her opinion clear without requiring her to state it. "His kitchen," she said at one point, holding a cast-iron skillet he had used for 30 years. "Who keeps this many things?" "He kept them because he used them," I said. Diane set the skillet in the donate box. Around 11 o'clock I went into his bedroom to start on the closet, and that was where I found it. On the top shelf, pushed to the back behind a stack of folded blankets, was a wooden music box about the size of a hardback novel. Dark walnut, brass hinges, a small brass clasp on the front that had gone slightly green with age. I had never seen it before. I lifted it down carefully and turned it over in my hands. There was no maker's mark, no inscription on the outside, just old wood worn smooth from decades of handling. I set it on the bed and opened the clasp. Inside, lined in faded green velvet, was a small mechanical movement and the familiar comb that produced the melody, though I did not wind it. Tucked into the velvet lining was a small iron key, old and slightly rust-spotted, attached to a paper tag with 2 words in my grandfather's handwriting. "For Claire." I was still holding it when Diane appeared in the doorway. "What is that?" she said, crossing the room before I could answer. She reached for it with that automatic possessiveness she had always had around anything that might have value, the same instinct that had directed her to arrive here before anyone else and start sorting before the family could discuss what was worth keeping. "Grandpa's name is on it," I said. I held onto the music box. Diane took it anyway. She turned it over, examined the outside, opened the lid. She saw the key. For a fraction of a second, her expression changed in a way I had seen before but could never quite name. Something behind her eyes sharpened and then closed, like a door swinging open and immediately shutting. "It is just an old music box," she said. She lifted the key out of the velvet, turned it over once, set it back down. Probably a trinket from a yard sale. She handed the box back to me, but something in the way she let go of it told me she had already decided what to do about it. "His handwriting is on the tag," I said. "It says my name." Diane smiled, the patient smile she used when she was managing me. "Claire. He probably labeled half his belongings out of habit. It does not mean anything. We should donate it with the rest of the small pieces." She took the box from me again before I could process what was happening and walked out of the room. I followed her into the hallway and watched her set it down on top of the growing pile near the front door that was destined for the donation center. "That is mine," I said. "He wrote my name on it." Diane was already moving toward the kitchen. "He wrote a lot of things. Come help with the pantry. I stood in the hallway looking at the music box on top of the donation pile. My mother was in the kitchen. Diane had already moved on. Neither of them was watching. I thought about my grandfather's words. Do not let them take it before you have a chance to look. I picked up the music box, walked to my car, and put it on the passenger seat under my jacket. Then I went back inside and helped with the pantry. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the music box in front of me and the iron key in my hand and tried to understand what I was holding. The key was old. Not old in a decorative way, old in a functional way, the kind that still opened something. The paper tag was brittle at the edges, the ink slightly faded but still legible. For Claire. His handwriting, his intention. I wound the music box and let it play. Old-time waltz, sweet and a little melancholy. I turned the velvet lining back carefully and found what I had missed the first time. Tucked flat against the bottom, thin as a folded letter, was a piece of paper. I unfolded it with the kind of care people use with things they sense are important. It was a photocopy of a property deed, 31 acres in Wilson County, Tennessee. Grantor, Ernest Talley. Grantee, Walter James Henderson. Dated 1994. Recorded with the Wilson County Register of Deeds. At the bottom, in my grandfather's handwriting again, Claire, this is real. The key is for the lockbox at First Federal, branch on Bell Road, box 447. The original deed is inside, along with everything else you need. I am sorry I could not explain more. I did not want them to know until it was time. I read it 3 times. Then I sat there in my quiet apartment in the silence of 2 a.m. and understood that my grandfather had been carrying a secret for 31 years, and that he had chosen me to receive it, and that my sister had tried to take it before I could look. First Federal Bank opened at 9. I was in the parking lot at 8:45. The branch on Bell Road was a modest building, beige brick and glass, unremarkable. I sat in my car with the iron key in my hand and thought about what I was doing. I was a 3rd-grade teacher with a cracked dashboard and a pile of ungraded spelling tests on my kitchen counter. I did not handle things like property deeds and safety deposit boxes. I handled things like reading groups and parent-teacher conferences, and whether Marcus in the back row was struggling because he needed glasses or because he needed a different seat. But my grandfather had chosen me. He had prepared for this moment. The least I could do was show up. The bank teller, a woman named Sandra who had the calm efficiency of someone who had handled 1,000 unusual situations without blinking, verified my identification against the account records, confirmed my name as the authorized access holder for box 447, and walked me to the vault without asking anything that would have been difficult to answer. I was shaking slightly, though I tried not to show it. The lockbox was heavier than I expected. Sandra gave me privacy in a small room off the vault, closed the door behind her, and left me alone with my grandfather's secrets. Inside the box was a legal-sized envelope sealed with tape. On the front, in his handwriting, "Open with Harold Calloway. Do not open alone. His number is inside this envelope, written on the card. Trust him. He knows everything." Beneath the envelope was a folder, the kind with the metal clasp, thick with papers. And beneath that was another envelope, smaller, unsealed, with one word on the front: Claire. I took everything to Mr. Calloway's office that same morning. He was a small man with a careful manner, and reading glasses he kept taking on and off as he examined what I had brought. When he opened the sealed envelope and spread the documents across his desk, he went completely still. He read without speaking for several minutes. His paralegal, who had come in partway through, stopped taking notes and just watched him read. When he finally looked up at me, his face had changed entirely. "Miss Henderson," he said, "I need you to understand that what I am about to tell you changes everything." And that was how I found out that my grandfather, a man everyone thought had nothing, owned 31 acres of Wilson County farmland with full mineral rights, land that a developer had been trying to purchase for 3 years, at steadily increasing offers. Land that was currently assessed at a value between $1.4 and $1.9 million, depending on how the mineral rights were calculated. And that was also how I found out that someone had already filed paperwork with the county recorder's office 2 weeks earlier, attempting to transfer ownership of that property out of my grandfather's estate. The signature on the transfer form was my sister's. She had used our grandfather's name and her own as executor, a designation that had not yet been legally established, which was the only reason the transfer had been flagged rather than processed. Mr. Calloway explained it to me carefully, the way he probably explained things to clients who were overwhelmed, which I was. He told me that the transfer had been caught because the county recorder's office had a 3-day verification window on estate transfers over a certain value, and my grandfather's attorney had been flagged as the contact, and Mr. Calloway had placed a hold on all transactions pending verification of the actual estate documents. Your grandfather anticipated this, Mr. Calloway said. He came to me 14 months ago. He told me that he believed a member of his family was trying to access his assets without his knowledge, and he asked me to document everything and to ensure that the estate could not be transferred without your direct involvement. She knew about the property, I said. He looked at me steadily. That is the question, isn't it? Someone knew. Someone had access to county records and understood the value of what was there. He set down his pen. There is something else you should see. He opened the folder and turned it so I could read. Inside were copies of 3 documents my grandfather had filed over the previous 5 years. The first was a complaint to Adult Protective Services, submitted 2 years ago, describing an incident where financial documents had been removed from his home without his knowledge. The second was a letter to his bank requesting that no changes be made to his account access without his written consent and a verification call. The third was a timeline he had written himself, handwritten on legal paper, dated entries going back 4 years. 4 years ago he had written, Diane asked about my property in Wilson County. I said I did not know what she was talking about. She pushed. I changed the subject. 3 years ago. Found property tax notice removed from my mail before I could see it. Diane was visiting that weekend. 2 years ago, Diane brought paperwork for me to sign. Said it was routine estate planning. I did not sign. She was unhappy about this. 18 months ago. Spoke with Harold Calloway. Beginning to document. Do not want to alarm Claire before there is something concrete to show her. 6 months before he died, Diane attempted to have herself added as joint owner on my checking account. The bank called me to confirm. I said no. Diane called the next day and said the bank must have made an error. I sat in that office and read my grandfather's handwriting, entry by entry, and understood that he had spent 4 years watching his own granddaughter circle him, not because he was confused or paranoid, because he had paid attention his entire life to numbers, to people, to the small details that reveal what someone actually wants, and what he saw was someone who had identified what he owned and intended to have it. He never told me. All those Sunday phone calls and front porch evenings, and he never said a word. I understood, reading his notes, why. He did not want to put the weight of it on me before it was necessary. He wanted to build the case first. My phone buzzed on the drive home. Diane. I let it ring. 2 more calls before I reached my apartment. Then a text. Mom said you went to the bank this morning. Did you find something of Grandpa's? If there are any documents related to the estate, you should let me know. I am handling the executor paperwork. Just making sure we do not miss anything. I read the text twice. She did not know exactly what I had found. She only knew I had been to the bank. She was trying to figure out whether to be worried. I did not respond. I went inside and made coffee and called Mr. Calloway back to ask what I needed to do next. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned more about estate law and property fraud than I had ever intended to know. Mr. Calloway walked me through everything with a patience that I suspected came from genuine outrage on my behalf. He had known my grandfather for over a decade. He did not say this directly, but I could see it in the way he handled the documents, carefully, almost protectively, like they were something personal. The transfer attempt Diane had filed was fraudulent on 3 counts. She had used a forged executor designation. She had misrepresented the property value in the filing, and she had used my grandfather's signature on a document dated after his death. That last detail was what elevated it from civil fraud to criminal forgery. The Wilson County District Attorney's Office was interested. Detective Reyes from the Financial Crimes Unit called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if I could come in. She was a practical woman, direct without being unkind, and she told me she had been building a file on elder financial exploitation cases in the county, and that my grandfather's documentation was, in her words, some of the most thorough self-documentation she had seen from a victim. He was a machinist for 35 years, I told her. He knew how to keep records. She said that the evidence supported multiple charges, including forgery, attempted theft by deception, and elder financial exploitation. She also said that the investigation had turned up something I did not know. Diane had not limited her activities to my grandfather. She pulled out a photograph. An elderly woman, maybe 75, with kind eyes behind silver-framed glasses. Dorothy Weiss, Detective Reyes said. Retired schoolteacher, lives over on Elm Hill Pike. Your sister introduced herself to Mrs. Weiss about 2 years ago, said she was a financial advisor, and offered to help her review her accounts. Mrs. Weiss's nephew noticed discrepancies about a year later. $8,000 moved in small amounts over several months. By the time the nephew figured it out, your sister had moved on. I stared at the photograph. She was somebody's grandmother. She probably baked things for her neighbors and called her family on Sundays. Was she able to get her money back? Detective Reyes shook her head slightly. Most of it is gone. But her case, combined with your grandfather's documentation, gives us the pattern we need to prosecute properly. I left the police station in the late afternoon and drove to Donaldson. I parked outside my grandfather's house, which was empty now, waiting for the estate process to conclude, and I sat in my car looking at the front porch with its 2 rocking chairs that were still there because nobody had gotten to them yet. He sat in that house for 4 years watching what was happening, documenting it, protecting his assets piece by piece, and he did all of it alone because he did not want to burden me before he had built something solid. He spent the last year of his life making sure I would not have to fight without evidence. He chose me not because I was the easy choice or the expected one, but because he believed I would finish what he started. The rocking chairs were still side by side on the porch, exactly where they had always been. I called my mother that evening, not to warn her and not to accuse her, but because she deserved to hear what was coming from me rather than from a detective. She was quiet for a long time after I explained. Then she said she had not known. Then she said she should have looked more carefully at the paperwork Diane had asked her to witness. Then she said she was sorry, in a voice that was too small for what she was sorry for. I believed that she had not known everything. I also believed that she had chosen, over and over, not to look closely at things that might have required her to see her favorite daughter clearly. Those are not the same as innocence, but they are also not the same as intent, and I had to decide what to do with that distinction. I told her the police would probably want to speak with her. She did not argue. Diane called me herself 3 days later. She had been served with a civil notice, and she knew the criminal investigation had begun. Her voice on the phone was a version of herself I had rarely heard, stripped of the professional gloss she usually wore, and underneath it was something that might have been fear or might have been calculation. I had known her my whole life, and I still could not always tell the difference. She said she needed to explain. She said she had been under financial pressure I did not know about. She said the property had been sitting unused for decades, and she had thought grandfather was not even aware of its value, and she had only been trying to make sure the family did not lose it to probate complications. I let her talk. She was very good at talking. When she finished, I said, "He documented everything, Diane. 4 years of entries. He knew exactly what you were doing, and he was not confused, and he was not unaware. He built a case, and he gave it to me because he trusted me to use it correctly. That is what is going to happen now." She said I was destroying our family over money. I said, "He spent his last years afraid in his own home because of what you were doing. Dorothy Weiss lost $8,000 she worked her whole life for. This is not about the money." Diane did not call again after that. The sentencing was 4 months later. I sat in the courtroom with Mr. Calloway beside me and Detective Reyes at the end of the row, and I watched my sister stand before a judge in Cuyahoga County in a gray blazer she had probably chosen carefully for the occasion. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of forgery. 1 count of attempted theft by deception over $10,000, and 1 count of elder financial exploitation. The judge sentenced her to 4 years, with a minimum of 2 before parole eligibility. Full restitution was ordered, including to Dorothy Weiss and my grandfather's estate. My mother sat 2 rows behind me. She had cooperated with investigators and was not charged. She looked older than she had in March, and she did not try to speak to me when the session ended. I was not ready for that conversation yet. Maybe I would be eventually. Some doors take longer to figure out than others. Afterward, I went to the cemetery. It was a Tuesday afternoon in July, hot in the way Tennessee gets in summer, heavy and still, the light going golden through the trees. My grandfather's grave was simple, a flat stone with his name and dates, and nothing else, because he had never been a man who needed extra words to explain himself. I told him what had happened. Not all of it, because some of it he already knew, but the parts that were new, the sentencing, the property, Dorothy Weiss getting her restitution. I told him I understood now why he had said what he said on the porch that evening, about paying attention and about not letting anyone rush me past something before I had a chance to look. I told him about the music box, that I still had it on my kitchen table, that I wound it sometimes in the evenings when I was grading papers. I told him that the waltz it played was one I had looked up and that it was called After the Rain, which seemed right somehow. I told him about what I had decided to do with the property. The developer's offer was still on the table. I met with them and with 2 other interested parties, and I negotiated, using the skills I had apparently inherited from a man who had spent 35 years knowing exactly which tolerances mattered and which numbers could not be wrong. The final sale was $1.7 million. I paid the estate taxes and Mr. Calloway's fees and set aside a portion in a managed account. With the remainder, I established the Walter Henderson Fund for Elder Financial Protection in partnership with the Wilson County Senior Services Office. The fund provides free document review for elderly residents who want a second set of eyes on paperwork, legal referrals for anyone who suspects exploitation, and monthly education sessions at 4 senior centers in the county. In the first 8 months, we helped 61 people and flagged 4 cases of suspected financial abuse that were referred to law enforcement. My grandfather was a machinist. He knew that the work that matters is not always visible, that the parts holding things together are often the ones nobody sees. He spent 4 years doing invisible work to make sure that when the time came, the structure would hold. I think about him when I sit on the porch of the house I bought in East Nashville, a small craftsman with a front garden I am still learning to tend, a porch wide enough for 2 chairs and an evening. I think about the music box on my kitchen windowsill, about the key in the velvet lining, about the weight of a promise he never asked me to make out loud but that I made anyway. Every time I visited, every Sunday phone call, every cup of coffee in his kitchen when the light came in gold through the window, and he asked me how I was doing and actually waited to hear. He told me the truth is what you find when you do not let anyone rush you away from what does not make sense. He spent his whole life proving that. He gave me everything I needed to prove it too. I wound the music box last night and let it play until the mechanism ran down and the last note faded into the quiet of my kitchen. After the Rain. Exactly right. If you are watching this, and you know someone like my grandfather, someone older, someone living alone, someone whose family maybe does not look as carefully as they should at what is happening to them, please check in. Ask questions. Offer to look at paperwork. Be the person who pays attention when it costs you something. That is the thing he taught me that no court order and no property deed could have taught me on its own. The truth is patient, but it helps when someone is paying attention.